Hey, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your co host, Dean, alongside my stalwart host, Chris, Mr. Historian, the harbinger of our podcast. And we're going to be talking today with Jeff from Idaho. And he's got some really interesting stories, some paranormal stories. And we're kind of just going to see where this conversation goes today. I do have questions about Idaho. I don't think it's every day I get to talk to somebody from there. And I know there are some really interesting and cool paranormal stories coming out of Idaho. How you doing today, Jeff?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Chris, what's up, man? You ready to get started?
Yeah, I'm ready to get started. I'm excited for this one. Jeff, you sent us an email. So, listeners, Jeff did reach out to us on email to get on the show today. So, we're excited about that. And he is a convert from Emma's podcast. So, Jeff, why don't we start from the beginning? You said in your email, you've had some intense experiences while you were working at a hotel. But before we can get to that, what got you into the paranormal, or what was your earliest experience that got you into this paranormal talk?
Well, and thanks for having me again, guys. Golly, I started when I was like 6 years old. I was into, well, the Universal monsters, of course. I was into Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the whole thing. And I read everything I get my hands on. Scared myself silly, of course, like you do when you're a little kid. And as I got older, I wanted to know, okay, I've heard about ghosts. You read all these stories and you're like, what are they real? And as you get older, you want to know more, or at least I did. And so I wanted to investigate, well, research further, I should say, just what are these things? Do they really exist? What's the truth behind any of it? And that's kind of where I started. I've always been into horror and all of that stuff my whole life. And so, yeah, sorry, I didn't really have anything prepped for this. So
that's the kind of intro we love because it's very colloquial, get a little bit of your background. But you said you were interested in all the quintessential monsters and stuff like that. Did you have a favorite one growing up? Like, what was your all-time favorite? If you could see or experience one or whatever, like what was your go-to for the freakiest or the most interesting?
I always wanted to be Dracula when I was a kid. I just thought being a vampire would have been so cool. But I will tell you a short little thing. I had a poster when I was 6 that had gotten out of a cereal box that was Frankenstein monster. It was a glow in the dark. And I'd had that sucker on my closet door, and that thing scared the hell out of me every single night. But I refused to get rid of it because I loved it. Fun dichotomy there. I cannot recall any major experiences growing up as a kid. It was more thinking something happened. My room was in the basement of the house, so of course I'm thinking, I'm hearing everything, every little creak, and I'm, oh, it's a ghost. But I cannot recall any real paranormal stuff until I got older. And the one thing that stands out was when I was about 19, I'd been out with some friends, came home late, and I looked upstairs because the way my parents' house was, it's you walk in and it's an entryway. You go upstairs to go to upstairs, downstairs to go downstairs. And I looked up and I saw the silhouette of our cat. I was just like, oh, hi, Tiger. And then I went downstairs and went to bed. I got up the next morning and I'm like, ooh, wait a minute. Tiger's been dead for 3 months.
Wow.
That really kind of freaked me out. And I mean, it was perfect. I just, I wasn't even thinking about it. I just, oh, hey, kitty. So I'm like, how is that something I made up in my mind? I wasn't even thinking of him. So yeah, how do you explain that? You don't.
That's such an interesting minor part of the story too, where you said that you weren't thinking about him. That's something that people don't talk about very often when they're experienced. Like they don't mention whether or not they had been thinking about something for a while, which you could, use to kind of maybe explain it away. But this is a situation where you're out with your friends, you came home late, like it wasn't even on your mind, and you saw something that made you react or say that, and it just happened to be the silhouette of a cat. But like, if I can ask, well, after you reflected on it the next day, did it just like absolutely terrify the shit out of you? Or like, was it kind of just like, did I really see that? Did you like second guess yourself? Or was it really like, no, I saw that for sure?
No, I knew for a fact. I'm like, I saw that. I know for a fact I did. Even though I was scared, like I wouldn't have seen that. And it didn't scare me so much. It was just like, I think he was just kind of saying hi.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, going into that a little bit, what do you think it was? Do you genuinely think it was your cat coming back just to see you one more time?
I think it was just him. I really do. I mean, it didn't ever happen again. It hadn't happened before. So, yeah, it could have been something. Who knows? But why would it show itself as my cat that had been to see and then just do it once? Doesn't make any sense.
That makes perfect sense. What are some of the craziest things you've heard of in your area or like just generally in Idaho?
Now, I've read up a little bit on some haunted history here, but nothing that's really stuck in my head as far as anything that I haven't experienced myself. But there are places around here that I have had some experiences. We used to, as late teenagers on up, we would always visit this old military cemetery. It's outside of Boise, Idaho. It's the capital city. And it was always rumored that something would happen there. And we had urban legends about the hatchet man that would, if your car doesn't turn on and the guy would come and get you and that whole type of thing. That was popular when I was in high school. But the main thing was there's a tree that's on the edge of the graveyard. And there was always if you pulled up to the graveyard, the tree would be on the inside of the cemetery. When you left the cemetery, as you were leaving, you would look and you'd see that the tree was actually on the outside of the cemetery. Now, I think that was more just people freaking each other out, because I don't know how many times we'd go up and say, look, see where it's at. Oh my God, it's outside of the. No, it was there the whole time. We just were freaking ourselves out. But there were times when you would go up to that cemetery and it was like, no, I don't want to be here. No, there is not a good feeling here. But then there'd be other times it was like, no, it's totally peaceful, totally calm. But there's a theater downtown Boise called the Egyptian, and it's styled in the old 1920s style, and it's just deco, looks really, really nice. And that place had always been rumored to be haunted. Well, one time, this was early 2000s, I was at an event with a bunch of friends, and I had gone to use the restroom, and I came out, and some guy rushes right past, cuts me off, and I'm like, Jesus, what? He's in a hurry. And I see him running up these stairs, like to go up to the projection area. And just after he runs past, a friend of mine comes down the stairs and I said, hey, did you see that guy? What was his deal? And she goes, what guy? I'm like, you didn't just have a guy. I just saw him go up the stairs. And she said, you saw the ghost. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I did.
What was this guy dressed? Do you remember what he was like dressed as, or like what was his clothing? And
no clue, because he had rushed by me so fast, it was like a blur. It was the weirdest thing. I've never seen just a blur of motion go by. You could just tell that it was like a human figure, and that was it. And apparently there were tunnels underneath there, and you could go into the basement and go into the tunnels. And I never did that, but I had a lot of friends that said they did, and they heard and saw a bunch of crazy things.
I'm looking up photos right now of the Egyptian in Boise, and it's a really interesting architecture for Boise, Idaho. I mean, like, it does look like the inside really does look like you're inside of a tomb, like a mummy tomb or like a pyramid or something. And it's got the hieroglyphs. It's got depictions of Egyptians and stuff like that. But what struck me the most about the Egyptian is that it's really small. Like, I mean, the inside, the show area is, it's a pretty sizable auditorium where you can have shows and whatnot, but the outside, the building, the structure itself is not that big. So I can see, like, if you were, somewhere in a closed off or like tight area in there and somebody like rounded a corner, ran up somewhere, like it would happen so fast that you wouldn't even have time to do a second take.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the lobby area is super tiny.
There were quite a few topics in your email that you brought up, but one thing that I really wanted you to share today, you said in your email that you worked at a full service hotel for a little over 3 years, and you've had not only your own experiences, but experiences of your colleagues that were there. You mind going into that?
Prior to this, like I said, I had a few small experiences, but nothing major. I had joined a paranormal investigation team at one point, I would say maybe 5 years before I started working at that hotel. Just briefly, never really I went on one investigation with them, never found anything. But this place, oh my God. So for legal purposes, I'm just going to call it the Hotel and Conference Center, but it's a 10.5-acre property with 3 buildings on it, 2 smaller outbuildings, and then the one main area. And you would walk into the lobby, and to your immediate right was the bar, then the restaurant, and then you would go down the hall to the room. And in the center of it was the dome, and the dome would have the pool and hot tub, and then a small little fitness center. To the right of that was a full conference center where I think we could hold like 600 to 700 people, and we had a pretty big event. But this was only a 2-level property, so it was only upstairs and downstairs. And same for the 2 smaller outbuildings. Now, building B had rooms that people could stay in, but building C in the back was closed down. So basically we just stored things out there, and there was like half power, no water, no running water, and that type of thing. So main things happened in the main building, but often in the side building. I had started working banquets when I started there, and then I ended up working security. So I was there all night, every night. And when we were working banquet, a coworker and I had one event where we were setting up for an event, sorry, and there was a glass window where you could look out and see the pool. And I don't remember which one of us pointed it out to the other, but like, "Hey, take a look over there." You could see ripples in the pool as if someone was swimming, but nobody was there. And I'm like, how is that possible? And I'm like, nope, nope, we're not going to deal with it. We're just going to go back to what we're doing. We finished setting up the tables and just, headed out. That was probably my first encounter there. I didn't really have anything happen again while I was working banquet. It wasn't until I started working security there. And we had a few things that would happen in that pool area thing where you would see the water rippling every now and then. That happened more than once, and I was told that the child had drowned there a few years back, and that was probably his spirit there. And interestingly, my night auditor had told me that the child's dad came and talked to the child, said, "Hey, we miss you, we love you," that whole type of thing, and it stopped happening. I wasn't there for that, but he told me that's what happened. So who knows? But there was a time when I was training a guy and we were walking around the conference center, and all of a sudden we heard the sounds of the treadmill starting up as if someone was in the fitness center. And we're like, wait a minute, no one should be in here. So we go walking out over there, and the treadmill is lighting up like someone was using it. So we actually went in there and messed with the buttons and whatnot. Couldn't figure out what happened. We later had maintenance take a look at it and see if there was a glitch or something wrong with it. They couldn't figure anything out. That happened a few times. You'd just be walking by and all of a sudden, dee, 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 dee. That was a little odd. But the biggest thing, there were a couple of big things. The one main thing was in the conference center, there was, men's and women's bathrooms, and the light switches, I would have to go and every night I'd have to go and turn off the light switch. But you did it with a key. You push a key in and then turn it, and it would lock the light on. And then same to turn them off. So every night I had to shut those off. I would go in, I'd knock on the door, security, make sure no one was in there, and then shut the lights off. And the way those doors were that they would shut, there was absolutely no light. I actually would step in just to see if there's like light coming underneath the door. No light whatsoever, pitch black. So I do that for both men's and women's rooms. And then I go walking down the hall, and all of a sudden I hear a toilet flush. I'm like, wait a minute. I just checked that nobody was in there. I went back in, showing my flashlight around, nobody's in there, turned around, walked away. This happened almost every night for right around 2 years. And it was the most bizarre thing. And other people told me about it happening to them too. And I had maintenance check the motion sensors on the toilets because that set it off. The motion sensor, it senses you sitting there to trigger it. So you could try it at night, but nothing would happen. So it was really strange to just be walking by that doing my security rounds, and all of a sudden, I don't know how many times I go in there, look, nothing there. Then one night, this is really bizarre. I hear that flush, and I had already checked the rooms and everything. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go double check, make sure someone's not in there. So I shine my light in there, and I'm like, security, anyone in here? And a girl's voice goes, oh, hello. And I'm like, whoa, hi, why are you in here? So this event that was here left 2 hours ago. And she said, oh, I just wanted some peace and quiet. I'm like, okay. So I said, well, ma'am, I need you to leave now. The conference is over and, you got to go. She came out and she goes, okay. And she came out, and I just remember her being like, I think she had brown hair, t-shirt and jeans, and we talked cordially, and I walked her out the door, but I did not ever turn around and look back to see where she went. And I don't know if she could have been the ghost that had been in there forever, because toilet didn't flush again for at least a week. But then again, she could have just been some weird person that decided to sit in the dark for 2 hours, which is really bizarre. That messed with my head for a long time, wondering what the heck that was all about. But the back building was probably the main focus of where we had things happen. Now, my boss that was the maintenance manager, he loved anything. Anybody said something about a ghost, he was all over it. He would go out there and investigate all the time. Then he'd come and tell me, hey, guess what I saw? I heard this and I heard that. So it was really interesting. There were nights you'd go and do the security check on that building. It's like, oh, no, I am not going in there tonight. There's just some bad vibe, really weird. But there was one night I had just shown up for my shift, and he calls me on the radio, and he's like, "Hey, are you here?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Grab a thermometer." It's one of those laser guided thermometers, you know.
Yeah.
And he goes, "Grab a thermometer, get your ass out here." And I'm like, "Okay." I go to our shop, get out there, and there was a temperature. It was so weird. It was a cold spot, and it was in between two rooms. And the way the doors worked for entering into the building, no air could come through because you would enter to the north and then turn to the right to go into where the rooms were. So you couldn't get air to curve around the corner. And in between two rooms, there was just this cold spot. It was about, I want to say, 2 feet up off the ground, and it only went to about 4 feet. And it was probably 5 feet in length. Now we use thermometers, and the difference in temperature was 15 degrees between the air right above it and the air right there. And it was so weird. You could put your hand in it. It's like, oh, it felt cold. It was the most bizarre thing. And it never happened again. We only had that happen that one time. And it's like, how is that possible? How does that happen?
If my boss told me to hurry up with a thermometer, I don't know what I'd be I was like, you got some bravery there. It's like, quick, grab a thermometer. And you're like, why? No time to explain. It's just like, okay. This is either going to turn out really, really bad or really, really interesting. I want to jump back really quickly to the woman in the bathroom. It's okay if you don't have any more details, because it sounds like it's similar to your experience where you didn't get a good look at the person who ran past you in the Egyptian. But like, do you have any insight or like any more depth into like what this woman looked like, what sense you got from her? Because it sounds like she was timid. Like it sounds like she was, kind of withdrawn a little bit, but she was also willing to move on and get out of the space. So she wasn't, giving you any problems, but you were also by yourself. Were there any like cameras or anything around? And like, what was the sense you got from this woman? Like, was there any question about whether or not she was doing something weird there? Or like, did you think about it afterwards, talk to your coworkers, and anything else you could remember from that situation?
Well, yeah, I did kind of rush over that. A little nervous, I suppose. I haven't talked about this in years. Like I said, before I had encountered her, I had checked that room, and there was nobody in there. For her to all of a sudden be in there was bizarre. I hadn't actually walked like into and checked every single stall, but it's like there was no reason for someone to have been in there. The only way she could have snuck in was if she was staying in the hotel and had gotten out of her room and gone into the conference center. So I don't know. I didn't get any sense. I did ask the front desk to check and see if she walked past after I escorted her out, but they didn't ever see her. And something in my head, I left this out from earlier, but something in my head told me not to turn and look when I let her out and just kept walking, and I was like, "Don't look back, don't look back, don't look back." And
Oh
I kind of
yeah.
struggled with that because I want to look back. I want to look back and see if she was a ghost, see if she just disappears into thin air. And so I, of course, stopped myself. I'm like, I'm going to go look. I'm going to go look. I'm going to go. And I went and
Yeah.
looked, and I couldn't see her. That doesn't mean anything necessarily. She could have just flipped around a corner and run off. Who knows? But it bugged me for years because I'm like, why wasn't I allowed to turn and look? Why was something in my
Yeah.
head telling me, don't look back, don't look back?
Yeah.
And then I just realized, well, maybe it's not my place to know. Maybe I'm not supposed to know right now. Maybe
Sure.
there's something else that's going to prove itself to me or not. And, call me crazy, but it was a weird situation. But no, I didn't get any weird sense from her at all. She was just like you said, she was kind of timid and just kind of quiet and very polite. I couldn't tell if she was, like I said, I didn't really get a close look at her clothing or anything. I was trying not to shine my flashlight in her face, but she was as
Yeah.
physical and solid as I was, which blew me away because I'm like, if she was a ghost, damn. It blows my mind that sometimes they can be that solid and not see through. I've never
Yeah.
been able to see very well. I could, in that regard, I can sense things sometimes or feel something, but I've never had the sight as it. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's a heavy concept. That what's most interesting to me is that sense that you got to not turn around, but you like when we get those senses, I feel like it could be nothing, right? It sounds like you're very objective in your like thought pattern, like thinking about what could or could not be. But like I think that I agree in the sense that maybe it's better to listen to that in the moment, because it's not like you get that all the time. And if there's a reason why it's coming to your brain and it's telling you that and you don't know why, it might be a good thing to listen to, because it could be a gut reaction that you're not like kind of like a subconscious sort of thing that maybe you should give a little bit more credibility to the deep down inside you, because maybe it knows better in the situation. But
I agree with you 100%. Yeah, if my subconscious is saying don't do this, it's like, okay, I better heed that call. So a couple other things that would happen on a regular basis was the phone calls from the rooms that were not occupied. Now, I would usually get a list of the rooms that were occupied from the front desk when I would check in, just so I was aware. And if I had to check on anybody or anything, I knew who I was dealing with or whether I was dealing with anyone at all. And I would have the front desk call me and say, hey, I'm getting a call from, for example, 327. There's no one registered to that room. So can you go check that room? So I would go and check the room, empty, completely empty. In fact, I would call the front desk from that room and say, hey, it's me. Nobody's here. They'd say, okay, well, thanks for checking. Probably just a glitch in the phone. It would keep happening. In fact, they even told me, you answer it this time. You listen to it. And I'm like, okay. And I did. And all you could hear was some crackly, staticky thing. Never heard a voice, nothing. So I put the phone down and I went back, checked the room again. Nothing there. And that happened more than once. Yeah, it could have been a glitch in the phone system. That phone system was old at that time. But how does that happen? That's kind of what I'd like to know. I have one more really fun phone one for you. So that back building, we called it the 500s. It had a call box that would have a phone in it for emergency. And this call box had been disconnected years ago. I mean, we would check it out, like, ooh, let's try to see if it works. Nope, nothing, dead silent. One night I'm doing my security rounds, just doing my check, and all of a sudden that phone is ringing. And I'm like, okay, that's a little bizarre. I'm like, what the heck? Pop open the door, the lid to it, and pick up the phone, and it starts dialing a number, and all of a sudden I hear my now girlfriend say, front desk, this is Brooke. And I said, you are not going to believe where I'm calling you from. I said, this was the emergency call box that's outside of the 500s. And she's like, oh my God, that's disconnected. I'm like, I know, but we're talking on it right now. This is so weird.
wow.
I hung up and that phone never worked again. So yeah, that was a little weird, a little odd, a little creepy. Some of the stories I got from other people, I started because of the things that had happened that I've already told you about. I started asking around. I'm like, hey, any of you guys ever had anything happen? So I've got a few that I've written down here. Well, I remember I told you about my boss feeling that he and I checking out that cold spot. Apparently, he experienced that more than once. He found it on the upstairs as well. And this gal that went with him, he would always take someone with him. And he always would grab one of the housekeepers who are usually scared to death. Girls. But he's like, come with me. Come on, let's go check this out. You'll be fine. You'll be with me. Apparently, she said when she experienced the cold spot, it felt like she had walked through cobwebs.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard of anyone saying, they walked through a cold spot and it felt like walking through webs. Because normally when someone's like they hit a cold spot, you just walked into a freezer, a giant freezer type of thing.
That had been said. It was called the cobweb effect. I've heard of that before. I think it was if you've ever read any of Hans Holzer's books. Dr. Hans Holzer was a paranormal investigator for most of his life. I believe he mentioned the cobweb effect, but there was a time when one of the banquet people was working really late. There were a couple chairs in the lobby of the banquet facility, and he's cleaning up, really tired. It was a long day, and he sees a guy sitting in the chair. And he was walked up to go tell the guy, I'm sorry, sir, this has been closed down. And the guy disappeared, vanished right in front of his eyes. He said it was the freakiest thing he'd ever seen. One night, one of the dishwashers was cleaning up after an event, and he saw a guy go around a corner, and he was like, hey, you're not supposed to be back here. And he ran over to the corner where the guy had been, and he was gone. And the other thing that I had experienced in the kitchen was I would be doing my security checks, of course, and walking around, and all of a sudden I hear this platter right behind me crash to the floor. And of course, I jumped, scared me to death. And I turn around, flash my light. There's nothing. There's nothing on the floor. Platters are all stacked up. And I just have had other people report that they would see shadows and figures in the restaurant area after closing.
Now, Jeff, I'm kind of curious about the location of where that hotel is. You said it's about 10 acres or so?
Correct.
So I'm wondering if it was built on a burial ground, or had there ever been any reports of people, committing murder or people dying at the location that you might have heard of?
Well, it's a location, it's right off of the freeway. So that's the area at least, and it's not too far from the airport, so it's easy access to that. It was built in the late 60s, I think it was 68 or 69. As far as any previous history, I have not delved into that, but I can tell you that people have died there. We've had two suicides that we were told had occurred in certain rooms, and one of the managers that was there when I started, he lived out in the abandoned building area, and he died out there. He had a heart attack just in the middle of the night. And boom, one of our security guys, before I had started security, found him. So yeah, people have died there for sure. As far as the burial ground, though, I have no idea.
The one thing that I think of when I think of haunted hotels, I just think about The Shining and the Cecil Hotel and how those places, those hotels, I believe I can't remember the name of the hotel where The Shining took place. That's actually haunted. Do you guys recall the name of that hotel?
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
I'm sorry. What was it? The Stanley Hotel? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, that's the Stanley in Colorado.
Right. Yeah. So I think like when they were filming Dumb and Dumber there, like Jim Carrey stayed in one of the supposedly haunted rooms and he like ran out and didn't want to come back. I just think of that hotel. I think of like the Cecil Hotel with the stuff with Elisa Lam, and then you have people like,
Ooh.
offing themselves there, and you just have all these bad things that happen at these locations. So I wouldn't be surprised if, the people that passed away where you used to work at, they're just still lingering around because, with hotels, they're filled with people. There's always energy. It's always constant energy 24/7 from the electricity, the people working there, the guests staying there. So to me, I could see how spirits or whatever is tied to the hotel now or was tied to the land would be attracted to that location.
Oh, I agree 100%. Hotels have, traditionally have been known to have hauntings just because of that fact. People coming in and out. And like you said, the Cecil especially. And yeah, Elisa Lam, oh my God, what a harrowing story that is.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by that situation of like what really happened to her. The logical consensus is that, she suffered for some depression or mental illnesses, and then that led her to unfortunately, taking her own life. But you could go down the paranormal route, which some people have, and said, maybe there was something more nefarious at play, that type of situation.
That's
for sure.
that's a
And
hard one too. Yeah, we actually almost talked about that. We thought about doing a recording on that a couple times, the Cecil Hotel, and like Chris said, like there's a lot of uncertainty about what was going on. But I mean, just like all these other stories that we hear regarding hotels, you just don't know exactly what's going on because there are so many people coming in and out, and there are so many things going on, like technology wise, that you don't have control or oversight of. And but it's interesting, right? Like, I guess it does make sense if you have so many people coming in and out, you're going to get some kind of crazy stories like this because it's just a natural part of human movement. Like, you're getting a lot of foot traffic, and it just seems like it's a place where things like this or unexplained things can happen more frequently than not.
Oh, absolutely. And to touch again on Elisa a little bit, she apparently was playing the elevator game. And if you haven't heard of that, I don't know all the details, but it involves pushing a bunch of buttons and then it takes you up to a certain floor and you're supposed to do a certain thing. And if the doors open, you're supposed to do this. The doors don't open, you're supposed to do that. One of the other podcasts I listened to went into detail on it. And so it looks like she was playing that game, but then she acts like she's interacting with someone. So, yeah, was it paranormal or was it just her mental disability?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. With the elevator game, I've actually heard about that game where you're supposed to follow like a sequence of buttons and you're supposed to do certain things when you get to each floor. And essentially, listeners, what the elevator game is supposed to do, it's supposed to take you to another dimension, like another like paranormal type of dimension where you are still in the same location, but you are in, for all intents and purposes, in a different realm. I did want to ask you, were there any other stories that you had from your colleagues while working at the hotel?
Absolutely. Okay, I'm just going to read this out if you don't mind. There was a maintenance guy named Bill, and he said he was near room 150. He turned to go into another room. In the corner of his eye, he saw someone going into room 139. He sent a housekeeper to go look, and no one was in there. Eloy was out in the 500s building, was checking fire extinguishers. He received a text and was responding to it. He put his phone away, looked up to finish his work, and saw what looked like heat waves moving across the hall into a room. In Alan's second cold spot. There were 3 people out in those 500 buildings. They went to look into a room, and they heard the sound of running water in the back of the room, back of the building. I'm sorry. They found some standing water in a tub. Now, the water had been shut off because the rooms were no longer used, and the pipes could only carry a very small amount. So, how did that faucet get turned on in the first place? Because no one was in the building other than the 3, and they were on the other side. In December 2014, banquets were preparing for a buffet one morning in a restaurant. Banquet captain sent a server to finish setting up, and she saw a man sitting at one of the booths in the restaurant. She went to approach him, and he vanished. He went back to the kitchen and told the captain, described the same guy that he'd seen 2 months earlier in the lobby. Wow, I'd forgotten about that. He said he kind of looked like Colonel Sanders, which I don't know why he went from I don't know why he went from Kentucky to Idaho, but whatever. One occasion, cook and dishwasher were conversing by the dishing machine. They saw a man go past them and turn towards the back sinks. They both walked over and found nobody there. But as they were looking, a pan in the sink rose up and fell to the floor. Ooh.
Wow, that's a heavy one. You actually saw something levitating. That's rare but interesting. That's crazy.
And for something to do that takes a lot of energy.
Absolutely. To actually physically, telekinetically, or psychokinetically move it is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it sounds like quite a few people had some really crazy experiences in that hotel. With that hotel, being haunted, it might be an energetic thing. It might be something tied to the location that just attached itself to the hotel and it's kind of just hanging out there, messing with people. From what you shared today, it doesn't sound like it's anything nefarious. It kind of sounds like something that just pops up here and there and just tries to get attention. And it's like, oh, look, I can lift this dish up and down in the kitchen in front of the cooks and the servers and whatnot. So what do you think, Jeff? What do you think is going on in that hotel? Do you think it's something that's just messing around, making its presence known? Or do you think it's something that's just there, but there might be a little bit more darkness to it, hiding behind the humor?
Oh, I just think it's some of it's just residual energy for sure. But others, sure, maybe they just want some attention. Hey, I'm here. Hi. Other than that, no, I don't sense any malevolence from it, but except for that outer building, like I said, there were times where, oh no, I'm not going in there. There's just bad vibe and bad juju, whatever. I'm not going in there tonight. And then the next night, everything's fine. So, yeah, I think it's just general, like we said, hotels tend to be haunted anyway with the influx of so many people and all that energy going back and forth. So yeah, I don't see anything bad.
Right. No, that makes sense because I've been to places that I felt things were there, but it wasn't evil. It was just something is there. But when you go to a location and like you said with that back shed or that location that you had to go to, and you get that feeling like, I don't think I want to go there. Yeah, those things make themselves known. I concur with you there. There was one more topic that I wanted to get into. You did suggest at the end of your email a couple extra topics you would like to talk about, but there was one in particular. You said this one specific little short sentence, we need to talk tarot. So why don't we go into tarot a little bit? What are your thoughts on tarot and that whole thing?
Okay. The reason I brought that up was because I've heard it mentioned on your podcast a few times, and I know you said one of your cousins reads tarot, but I've had 2 different experiences because it seems like you're still a little bit like, I don't trust it. So I kind of wanted to throw out my experiences and perhaps, well, I'll just share my experiences. How's that?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
So my first experience with the tarot, and it's much like when people mess with Ouija boards. You don't know what you're doing. You shouldn't be fooling with it in the first place. But and I've played with a Ouija board a couple times. Never really had any experiences with that. Not opposed to them, just not my thing. But I do know that if you mess with them and they can things can come through and mess with you. So the tarot said I was hanging out with a buddy. This was my early 20s, and we're drinking, just kind of chilling out, listening to music. And he's like, "Hey, let's see if we can, contact the dead or something like that." And he whips out this tarot deck, and I'm like, "Okay, I don't really know much about this, but okay." And then he takes a card out, and he's like, "Here," he's like, "concentrate on it and focus on it. And if you stare into it, you could actually like go into the card and go into another dimension." I'm like, "Okay, that sounds a little weird, but I guess I'll kind of try it." And it didn't really work, but it was weird and kind of spooky and this whole thing. Well, then he started trying to use them to contact. Let's use it like a Ouija board. Let's use it to contact the dead. And like this was a long time ago, so I'm a little hazy. Sorry on remembering detail, but we had an experience one time where we were doing this with his girlfriend, and there was another girl there. We were kind of doing a couples thing and like ooh, hoop the girls type of thing. But then all of a sudden he's like, "Oh my God, look at her eyes. Her eyes, they're turning black." And this girl's sitting here like, wait, what?" And he's freaking out. And you could kind of feel like there was something malevolent in the room. So we all got out of there and, freaked ourselves out or whatever. But then things just started. I just remember that we were having weird things happen. So I finally said, "Look, I'm going to take these cards, I'm going to burn them, and let's just get rid of it, get rid of this negative energy or whatever." So I took the cards, and there was a little hill I went to, a place where people used to hang out and have campfires, and you could look out over the city. And so I went up there and I dug a little hole and I burned the tarot deck. And there were some cards I remembered, like, "Oh, the Tower. Oh, the Hanged Man." Threw it in there. Okay, figuring we're done with everything. And a few days later, I was with another friend and we were hanging out at a park, and I reached into the back seat of his car and I'm like, "Oh my God." I pulled out a card I knew I had already burned. And he's like, "Are you sure you didn't just miss that one?" I said, "No, I remember burning this one." And so he's like, "Well, do it again. Let's get rid of them now." So we did. And then that was the end of it. But that was like, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with these cards. These are so bizarre. This is so weird. We had some creepy things happen. Well,
Do you remember
I
what
had a
card it was?
friend. You know what's sad is I don't. I wish I
Oh
did.
man, that would have been really. You get a tattoo of it or something. That would like heavy.
Boy, no kidding, right? So a couple years later, I had made friends with a guy, still friends with him. He's kind of my mentor to a degree. And he was a medium, still is, and he would read tarot. And I was like, "Oh, tarot. No, 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 no. I don't want anything to do with those. They're too weird." And he said, "Okay, well, what happened?" And so I told him, and then he's like, "Oh, okay." He's like, "You guys were just messing with the wrong way. That's not what they're for." And so he showed me, and we did some readings. He did some readings for me. I'm like, "Oh, okay. Now I understand. And now I have a deck. I have done readings myself. And what you're supposed to do is just you look at the images on the card and you just kind of get a sense of, okay, what does this card say to me?" And it's more that sense versus, trying to dive into the card. But it's more of a divination thing. It's just like someone asks, "Am I going to get a new job in 6 months?" And, the odds may be favorable for that, and they may not be. And the tarot cards, you can read them, and I don't know how else to explain it. It's not, when I say divination, there's nothing malevolent about that. It's just basically asking for guidance from like your higher power or your spirit guide. And if you use it in that sense, it's not harmful. It's only when you were trying to dabble in the other that's when kind of like malevolent things come in, like a lot of times with Ouija boards. They're like, "Oh, we're going to mess with this kid," So that's kind of my take on the whole thing.
No, that's fair. I'm inclined to agree with you. And the only reason I usually go on my tarot rants, which I'm sure you've heard in our earlier episodes, it's because it's become a type of fad in today's world where like people will pick up a tarot deck and start playing with it and not really understanding the ramifications of using them. Because my cousin, you did mention earlier, she does tarot. She's very gifted at it. She talks to spirits, she gets downloads. the whole nine. And to reiterate what she said to me multiple times, it's that it's like you said, it's akin to a Ouija board. If you don't know what you're doing and you don't know who you're channeling or talking to, that's when it can get dangerous. Doing it in the proper environment, you know exactly what you're doing, you know how to interpret. To me, then that's fine. But I will never, ever touch a Ouija board again. Not a fan of them at all.
Fair enough, and I'm really not either. But yeah, it's exactly that. It's, yeah, if you don't know what you're doing, don't mess with it. If you don't know how to handle a gun properly, don't have one.
Yep, that is absolutely true.
Yeah.
Treat tarot and these divination tools as a paranormal gun. If you don't know how to use it, you're going to hurt yourself. But Jeff, before we end for today, do you have any other things that you would like to share with our listeners? Any other stories or any other thoughts on divination tools or tulpas or curses or anything like that before we end?
Ooh, yeah, I got a couple. So you mentioned tulpas. Now I want to put something out there that a lot of times people are like, oh, well, this was just a tulpa. You know, I just created this. Doesn't work like that. You actually have to concentrate and completely focus and meditate in order for a tulpa to be created. So when people are just like, oh, it's a random tulpa thing, or 10 people were thinking about dragons, so now we should have dragons. It's like, yes, but were they concentrating and creating this? More of a focus thing. Tibetan lore, if you read up on it, that's how they would create the tulpas. Personally, I think they're dangerous, but that's just me. But that's just, like you were saying, it's like with Ouija, it's become popular and everyone's like, ooh, tulpa, tulpa, tulpa. So that's one thing. Other thing I just kind of wanted to touch upon was, I think that a lot of times when we think there's a mimic in our home, that it's merely residual energy. For example, like what I'm doing right now, if I came down and saw myself doing what I'm doing right now a week from now, it's like, oh my God, a mimic. No, I'm just seeing a residual because it's a timestamp. Everything that we do is timestamp, in my opinion. And so I think that's more what we're seeing rather than mimics so much. Could it be a mimic? Absolutely. Do I know? Nope. I am not the paranormal expert. But that's just my theory.
Jeff, thank you so much for reaching out to us to come on the show today. It was a pleasure to have you on. Both Dean and I enjoyed listening to the stories you had to share today and your opinions on tarot. I appreciated that and tulpas and mimics. Well, we hope you had a good time, and we hope to talk to you again.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to say, Jeff, is I totally agree with you with the tulpa thing and also the timestamp thing. That sounds really interesting, actually. I think that you have it spot on where people misunderstand what manifesting things can do. And even though I play skeptic more so than not on a lot of the topics we discuss, I think that I really do believe that there is something to concentrating mind power amongst a bunch of people. Whether it actually, physically manifests anything is one thing, but it certainly seems to have some kind of effect around that group of people. Like, I think there's even been studies, they've talked about this before, where like electromagnetism studies and stuff like that, where there is some kind of residual effect going on. So I wouldn't stop and say like, absolutely not, it's not possible, but there's something going on for sure. So I thank you for sharing that last bit on tulpas and manifesting in time imprints and stuff. I think you're spot on with all that. Thanks again, Jeff. It's really interesting to talk to somebody who has so many stories from hotels. That's not something we get to do very often. So it's been great.
Appreciate you guys having me. This has been fun. I was a little nervous, so sorry if I was kind of rushed, but I do have more.
No, you did great. You did great, man.
You did great. You did great.
This is fun history, though. Check out Troy Taylor's In the Valley of Kings. It's about the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb and what happened afterwards with the entire group of people that went in there.
Yeah, that'd be a good topic someday, man. Absolutely. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Definitely have to check that out. And listeners, if you want to be on the show like Jeff was on today, all you got to do is just shoot us an email. We'll schedule a time and we'll have you on. Thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and most podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe and share. Also, don't forget to give a follow on Instagram at twroadpodcast and follow my TikTok at twrpodcast. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.